Hey guys, just saw an interesting quote that came up on the chess.com from the chess.com page on Facebook. It's a quote by Garry Kasparov. It says that to become good at something you have to know the basic principles. To become great at something you have to know when to violate those same principles. And it got me thinking about the game that I played this morning. So I'm 1432, my opponent's raised to just under 1400. We both play 90 plus accuracy in this, and at one point in this I am a willful violator of some of the principles that I teach and other people teach. And I think that something else as well is that I really notice this when I'm coaching players below 1000, that it's very easy once you start to get hold of some of these basic principles to get kind of hung up on abiding to those, adhering to the principles, and it really is important. When I watch, whenever I look at Grandmaster games, whether played live or old games or whatever, one of the things that really jumps out to me is that the games tend to be 100% pragmatic. It's like there are moves that are played that I go, well, that violates a principle. And yes, it does. And that's the thing. If you stick only to principles, you'll only get so far, right? It reminds me of the scene in The Matrix when Morpheus is teaching Neo Kung Fu in the dojo, the virtual dojo. And he says, every computer program follows rules, and some rules can be bent, other rules can be broken. And you need to know when to bend rules and when to break them. So let me show you this game. We won't take too long over it. So I'm playing with the white pieces, and we have a Sicilian. I play knight f3, knight c6, and b3. This is a line that I've been trying out recently. I'm not totally enamored by it. Then we have e6, bishop b2. So the idea is that I'm trying to get my opponent out of the comfort zone to some degree. Now d5, e takes d5, e takes d5. Okay, so we're in a kind of a French exchange position for black. So I now bring out my bishop. I want to castle my king. Good principled play. You want to develop your pieces, all that kind of stuff. And this stuff all does make sense. And you need to know when to break the rules as well. Okay, so now knight to e7. So defending the knight. Obviously, if I captured here, we've got b takes, and then black would end up with 3 pawn islands, which is not ideal. So maybe he's thinking if bishop takes, recapture with a knight. Okay, but right now I've got 3 pieces developed and black has 2. I now castle, so I've got 3 pieces developed and castled, so that's worth 5 points in development against 2. And now we have a pawn push, so black again is delaying castling. But clearly there's a point to this, which is that black wants to stop my dark square bishop. So maybe the idea is my dark square bishop might come to a3 and start looking at this pawn, or we might have to push d3 and bring the bishop round again. But either way, making that second pawn move, it's still slowing things down. So what I decide to do is play c3 and challenge the d pawn. Now I have bishop d7, breaking the pin on the knight, and I slide my rook over to e1. So far so normal. I've got a slight issue with my my b knight, my queen's knight. Can't really get into the game just yet, but there is some tension here on the board, so we're expecting that to resolve itself at some point. On black's side of the board, there's an issue with a dark squared bishop, which is not about to jump into action soon. So we see g6, preparing bishop g7, fianchetto on the bishop. So at this point now I decide that there's not much scope for my light square bishop down this diagonal, so let's just reroute it and start looking at f7 instead. And now we have the bishop fianchetto from black, and knight into g5. Okay, so yeah, I haven't finished development. I've still got a knight, I've still got a queen on the back rank, my rooks are not connected. But this is a tactical opportunity. So my bishop just looked at f7 on the previous move, and now I've got a knight also looking at that. It's defended only by the king. Right, so what is black going to do here? I mean, he could, I guess, try and defend there, but then knight or bishop could capture, pawn takes, and suddenly black is looking down the barrel at a unpleasant rook. So black now castles. Now, generally speaking, you don't want to trade two minor pieces. So very, very often you get this opportunity. I could trade, let's say, bishop takes with check, rook takes, knight takes, king takes. And numerically, that's an equal trade. A rook's worth 5, a pawn's worth 1. Bishop and knight are worth 3 each. But the general principle is that having two active pieces later on in the game is better than a rook and a pawn. Okay, so you want to hang on to the bishop and knight combination. So now I add another piece. So often in chess, we overcomplicate things, but the right approach is sometimes just blunt. It's just like, okay, you defend twice, I'm going to add a third attacker, what have you got? And there's the same issue here, with putting the bishop there. So we have now, this is the key moment, this is what I wanted to show you, right? Bishop f5. So what black is doing here is simply trying to shield the f7 pawn from this assault. So right now we're back to a situation with two attackers and two defenders. And it doesn't really make much sense for white to trade off bishop and knight for rook and pawn. So what would you do in this situation? Now, this is where I'm a willful violator of chess principles, okay? And particularly something that I stress very often myself, and that is holding on to my king's bodyguard of pawns. I'm loath to throw those pawns up the board. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the h-pawn, particularly when you've got this kind of fianchetto structure, the h-pawn can be useful. It's maybe the least critical of the three. Sometimes the f-pawn will make a pawn break, particularly if you've castled kingside or you've still got your rook on the f-file as well. That can make sense. But here, I actually throw the g-pawn up the board. So pawn to g4, I'm attacking the bishop. So the bishop, it blocked the queen's path to f7, but it's in a position where it can be attacked. Now, what does the bishop do now? If the bishop retreats here, I can simply capture, or even capture with the knight. Maybe you just capture the bishop if pawn takes, knight takes, and we've got a fork on queen and rook and bishop, and that's kind of ugly. So what we see is actually simply the knight now moves away to c8. There's really nothing that the bishop can do. So I thought, well, why's black played that move? Well, then I realised it's actually discovered attack by the queen on my knight on g5. So, first of all, the knight goes in. I capture the pawn with a knight. Now the knight is attacking the queen. The knight is also threatening to move anywhere at all with a discovered check by the bishop. So we have rook takes, bishop takes, king's in check, king takes, and now I grab the bishop. So from that exchange, from that sequence of captures, I'm now an exchange and a pawn up, right? I've got 2 rooks, 2 minor pieces, and 7 pawns. Black has 3 minor pieces, but only 1 rook and only 6 pawns. Plus the king is in some space, and now, from that is the pivotal moment in the game where I managed to get the upper hand. So we'll show you the rest. So we have queen into g5 check. I block with my queen. So we're offering either a trade of queens, in which case I recapture with a pawn, reconnect my pawns. But also I'm allowing black here to grab that pawn. If he wants to grab that pawn, he does indeed go ahead and grab that pawn. But to me, this is kind of okay because, yeah, it was a double pawn. It was kind of out in space on its own. It was in no man's land. Plus, with the situation here, the king's out in the open, right? I would be quite happy to eliminate my other f-pawn off the board and bring my rooks into play. This is what I want to be doing right now, okay? So, queen c7 check. So this is a fork. I've got the king in check. I'm also looking at this pawn here. King moves. I don't grab the pawn straight away. I capture on d4. Pawn takes d4. And now I need to move my knight. So my knight wants to come around to here, to c4, guarding some of these key squares around that king. This is what we have to do. We have to go in for the king now. And also, if ideally, I want to keep the pressure on so much that this knight doesn't get to move and release this bishop, this rook into the game. I want that rook to stay caged as long as possible. So now again, queen comes down with check again, and now again, queen g3. I'm saying to black, yeah, you want to trade queens? That make my day. I would love to trade queens. So we trade queens. And I recapture here with the f pawn, and the reason is I want open files. I've got 2 rooks on the back rank, 2 free rooks, whereas black's only rook is currently being imprisoned by his own knight. So now the knight comes flying in, rook f1 check, knight to c4 check. Does black want to trade? Black trades again. Okay, and now I've given back the pawn, but I'm still in exchange up. So I have a rook for a knight, and we both have kind of unpleasant pawns. Okay, so now king to e4. Now this is interesting because here now black starts to violate the rules, realizing actually my king is one of the strongest pieces on the board right now. Okay, so maybe he should have brought his rook out earlier, but he advances his king. I get my rook behind the pawn. Now advance c5. Bishop now looks at the d2 pawn, and I simply protect it with my bishop. Knight comes in. Now I attack the knight, and interestingly, so black did think for a while, 1 minute 28 seconds on this move. Decides not to save the knight, which I thought was odd at the time. So I grab the knight, a5, now I push the pawn. So what this is I'm saying to black, okay, I'm going to keep the pressure on, I'm going to keep my advanced pawn moving forwards. If you want to grab it, that's fine, but I have a discovered attack on b5. Grabs. Okay, removing pawns off the board, removing bishops off the board, this is all good for me. And now we're in a situation where we've simplified right down, we've got 2 rooks against 1 rook, and now grab another pawn while we're there. And okay, it's not an entirely comfortable situation, right? What I want to avoid is having to trade both of my rooks for 1 rook and this pawn. Excuse me. However, I should be all right because I've got a runaway a pawn, right? And this king would end up having to go all the way up the board to intercept that pawn, in which point my king can come through, grab these guys, and hopefully shepherd one of these through to promotion. So that should be all right. So we have king now back to d2, and I start to press in with my king. I just want as much material as possible bearing down on this dangerous pawn. This is the only way that black could win the game, and that's what you have to be thinking in the end game, right? If my opponent is going to win in any way at all, what has to happen? Well, they've got to promote this pawn. Okay, so what I need to do is I just need to make sure at all costs that pawn goes nowhere. Rook comes back down, and now again a4. So now I'm using my pawn again as a decoy. I'm saying, right, black, you are going to have to do something. The king is helpless. The king can't go here or here, okay, and is not going to be able to stop that pawn. So if you keep just messing around with shuffling your rook backwards and forwards, that pawn's going to keep going up the board, and at some point you're going to have to take it out. So black decides I'm going to take it out, removes the defender from d3, I grab d3, and I'm trying really hard actually to get my rooks onto the first and second ranks and try and get a mate there, but I can't find the way. And now we shuffle backwards and forwards a little bit. Now my rook goes up to start paying attention to those spare pawns. Rook comes back down, and now this is kind of the end. So what black's doing here is, yes, putting me in check, but also walking into a forced exchange. So there's nothing now that black can do to avoid sopping off rooks, losing this pawn, and then this guy's going to convert. Okay, so and then black now resigns. Okay, so key thing. There are principles. Okay, so let's just go back to this point. So bishop blocks, right? Was that the right approach from black? I don't know. I think maybe a better move. No, well, yeah. So knight to there would have also protected the pawn. If rook takes, bishop takes, then it's still not the end of the world. Yeah, maybe there could have been options. Or maybe just even moving the king away, you know. Give up a pawn, it's only a pawn. So if bishop takes, actually, yeah, if bishop takes, rook can't take, because then knight there would have been a fork. But there were options. And how long did black take over that move? 10 seconds. Right, then I think for 30 seconds, and I decide, look, I know it's breaking the rules, but, you know, it's my game. I have the white pieces. Nobody else controls the white pieces. And like Kasparov says, you know, you have to know when to bend them, when to break them, when the situation demands. And here I think it was okay to do so. So, yeah. We all need to be thinking about the rules are principles are there to guide us, not to constrain us, right? They're there to help you to develop, to control the board, to create opportunities. They're not there to, and they're there to protect us, of course, as well. But they're not there to stop us from playing the right move. If the right move bends or breaks the rules, so be it. Okay, they're not the laws of the game; they're just principles. That's it. So you know, just think about that when you're over the next few days, when you're playing your own games. Okay, to just think. Okay, this is a guideline. It's there to be a general piece of advice. It's not a rule. I don't have to follow this. I don't have to stick to this. And if you want, go look up a Grandmaster game and see how, you know, they just seem to, they consider far more possibilities than we often consider. Yeah, as beginners and improving players. So yeah, look at that for inspiration if that helps. But I hope this has been useful for you. I know this is going to be very, very important for several of my students as well. So hope it's been useful. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you aren't a subscriber. I'll see you soon.